Love, love, until I feel the breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome to the Spirit of Life program. Lucia Pace is my name, and today my guest is Rachel Fleurant. Rachel has an interesting transitional story from worldly aspirations to a heart filled with godly yearnings. Rachel, welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's good to be
Rachel, what did your life look like prior to you taking your final profession? Is that what it's called?
That's right, yes. I just recently had my final professions only 2 months ago.
Well, very new.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So prior to joining religious life, I grew up in Sydney, and my parents are from Mauritius, so I come from a very small family of 4, so I have an older brother. And growing up, I had a very happy childhood, so I had a very good, solid, I guess, loving family. And I think that that's where my vocation really came from, that deep love my family have always shown me. So growing up, I had big plans for my life. I had all these dreams and goals. So by 25, I dreamed that I would be married and start a family. And I also wanted to pursue a career in marketing. So just after having left school, I had that desire to go into marketing. So I studied and completed a Bachelor of Commerce, major in marketing. And then following that, I started working in the corporate world. So I worked for a few different companies in the corporate sector, enhancing my marketing skills and wanting also to work towards a marketing career as a marketing manager. So I had great dreams in terms of working in the corporate world, but also realised at a particular time in working in that area that I found myself very dissatisfied and unhappy with the corporate world because it's quite demanding, and I found myself in a very aggressive market, and I was starting to feel very dissatisfied and very much longing and yearning for more than just the business world in terms of my own path and journey in life. And on the side of my working career, I was also involved in my local youth ministry. So I was involved in a youth group where I was able to serve the young people and really give my life to God in that way, through my faith and expressing that faith to other young people.
Interesting. So how did your decision to go into religious life emerge for you? What were the sequential moments?
Well, there were lots of stages in that whole discernment calling stage. I guess as I talked a little bit about my whole journey with my youth ministry, I found that I didn't start getting into my faith till I was about 24, 25, so I was already a young adult. But I went to a faith formation program which ran for 6 weeks, and it's there that I really truly had a personal experience of God's love. There were different subjects each week, but it was particularly the week that talked about inviting God's love into your life, where I was really searching and yearning for that love in a personal way. I'd just come out of a relationship, so I was pretty heartbroken and was thinking, where's my life headed? I thought I was going to marry this guy. And it was there at that renewal whole life experience that I was able to see that God was real and tangible, and that I was really desiring was Him. But yet I was looking for love in the wrong places.
Oh, okay.
And it's there that I started sensing a call to serve the young people and to really give my whole self in terms of youth ministry. But I didn't have a sense of a call at that immediate moment where I felt God's love. But I felt that God was inviting me to serve Him in that way with the young people.
Rachel, I'm just interested to ask you now, you know, for people that are watching this program, many that are in relationships get a lot of gratification and love out of that one-on-one contact with another person. How do you deal with that? How do you receive love without that contact, that, you know, tactile contact?
Well, that's a very good question. Yeah. I'm very blessed within my my community, well, I'm part of a religious community, so I live with other women. And the way that I see that deep longing that I have and yearning for love is through my sisters. So I'm a part of a sisterhood whereby I live with 3 other women. And we have that time where, for example, where we come home and we can have a meal together and we share authentically about what's been happening in our lives, the highs, the lows, the good times, the bad times. And I guess too, in terms of living the vow of celibacy, that I still have attractions and yearnings for the opposite sex, but I take those yearnings, those desires into my prayer time. So we spend a lot of time in solitude with God and communing with Him, and I bring those desires in my prayer times where I feel that God's satisfying those needs and the hungers that I have, because He also desires and hungers for that love in response.
That would be difficult, I guess, also for people to understand that you would get some form of fulfillment or satisfaction in taking those, what we would regard as normal human emotions and desires or needs. Can you maybe tease that out a little bit for us? You know, how does one get satisfied, or how do you satisfy those needs under prayer? That's a difficult one to understand. Yes.
It's a very hard one. I think it's really contained within the mystery of who God is, that God is an intimate, wants intimacy with us. And through, I think, being really honest, it's like being in a true, authentic relationship. It's about talking about the friendship and talking about what's going on and listening to what God's saying back to me. So it's really about that interpersonal relationship with God, like a friendship or a relationship as we're communing now, that listening and being with God, that it's beyond my understanding, but it's really the mystery of God who reveals who I am and who He is in my life too.
Okay, I get that and I understand that, but what happens to the desires?
The desires are fulfilled through the God coming to meet me in that place.
Right, okay. We're going to a break now. I'd like to sort of probably pick that up when we come back and tease it out a little bit more.
Sure.
You're watching the Spirit of Life program. Tune in, we'll be back shortly. Welcome back. You're watching the Spirit of Life program. Lucia Pace is my name, and today my guest is Sr Rachel Fleurant. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name properly, but
no, you're doing really well.
Thank you, Rachel. Now, just prior to the program, we talked about fulfillment, this love fulfillment. Could you just distinguish the difference between the love fulfillment that you feel and maybe opposed to a normal relationship between man and woman? Yeah.
Well, I guess I could use it from my own experience of having been in a relationship. Like having intimacy or being with somebody, you might have the warm, fuzzy feelings when you're next to that person, or holding hands or kissing. But yet, sometimes even when you're in a relationship with someone, there's a deep loneliness. There's still an emptiness within, whereby you still feel like you're connected to that person, but you still feel empty inside. And I guess that's what I'm talking about in terms of the relationship with God, is that the full fulfillment of being with Him and feeling Him is a much deeper interior feeling of, and it's not always based on feelings either. It's something that takes me beyond feelings or what I know in my head as a head knowledge, but somehow it goes beyond who I am as a person in the mystery of who God is, loving me and being in love with Him.
Interesting. That's a great answer. Thank you. That's really helped me understand it better too, Rachel. Sister, and I would like to also ask you now, okay, so at what moment did you know, did you really know that you were being called to a vocational calling in religious life?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, there were there were a few distinctive moments within my whole process of the journey and discerning and listening to God. I'd have to say one of the fundamental huge milestones in that discernment was in 2002 I went to a World Youth Day in Canada, and I was very fortunate to be in the presence of Pope John Paul II, who's a bit of my hero. And it was there that I was able to be on a pilgrimage, so I was away from the natural distractions of everyday life. I was travelling with other young people, I was away from my work, my family, my friends, and every other distraction. So it's there that I really heard the call that God was placing on my life. Pope John Paul II really empowered young people. He said to us, young people, whatever path God has for your life, really truly find that path to true happiness. And he really spoke about the different vocations. So I was able to hear from priests, religious, who were all very young. I think I've only seen mainly older priests and religious within my whole childhood and growing up in life. So I never really saw how young people could be religious and priests until I was at World Youth Day, and I was thinking, these people are fun and they're having a great time and they're full of joy and full of the Spirit.
So there is a life beyond the secular world.
Absolutely, yes. Okay. And so that's where I started thinking about it. And I was starting to ask God the question, what are you calling me to? Am I possibly called to this way of life? I had never really been open to the prospect of being a religious.
Was that a difficult proposal to embrace?
Oh, absolutely.
It was. Give us a little bit of an insight into what you went through in terms internal.
Well, I guess for me, I had been brought up in a quite well-to-do family, so the idea of having to give up or sacrifice many things was something that I found very difficult. And also, as I started looking and discerning which religious group I would join, I was very attracted to the Missionaries of God's Love. And one particular fundamental part of their way of life is radical poverty. So it was the poverty element, I think, that I probably struggled with the most, because I was thinking, how can I live this life when I love fashion, clothing, glamour, and all the things I'd grown up with. So I guess that, they were the things that I struggled with, but I took them to prayer and I really prayed and asked God in prayer, can I really do this? Am I able to detach from these things that I held as something very important in my life?
You were obviously able to detach, but how did the detachment come?
Well, it was a gradual one.
Can you give us an example of the challenges or the battles that you might have had in the transition?
Yeah, sure. Well, I found myself, in the last year of my, before I joined the sisters, I found that I spent less money on clothing. I started wearing less makeup. I guess I would call that a sense of I started to become consecrated. And what I mean by that, becoming consecrated, is that I started becoming more and more given to God and the things of what God was asking of me.
So you gave up, you decreased your need to put makeup on and buy clothing, etc., etc. But still, was there still that sense of, oh my God, what am I doing here? What am I doing? What am I letting go? What about your independence?
Yes, well, that's another big one too. Having to leave my family and your privacy, that's a big one too. And having to share my life with a whole group of new people that I had never lived with before. Having to leave the family, the friends, my job. A lot of my identity, I guess, was in the things that I had before. But somehow, from leaving the independence, I became much more interdependent in relying on those who I was coming into the community with and sharing all the things that we've been given as one big community.
So are you saying that do you lose your identity though, or do you gain your identity? I'm a bit confused in which way it would go.
I'd say I've taken on, I don't lose my identity fully, but I take on a new identity because I've joined a religious community that has a particular way of life, a particular spirituality, a particular way of being that's different to who I was before I joined.
Interesting, very interesting. We just need to go for another break now. We'll be
Okay.
back. We'll see you back straight after the break.
Go till I feel much breath of the Spirit flowing in me. Blow, blow, blow till I feel much breath of the Spirit flowing in me.
Welcome back. You're watching The Spirit of Life. Lucia Pace is my name, and my guest today is Sister Rachel Fleurant, who has had a transition from worldly aspirations to godly yearnings. Rachel, welcome back.
Thank you.
Now, prior to the break, we talked about World Youth Day and how God had been speaking to you. Tell us a little bit how does God speak to you? You hear people saying, God said, or God told me, or I heard God say. How does that work?
Well, I don't think often God doesn't come over a big, loud, booming voice, like with a big microphone saying, I love you, Rachel. I don't always hear God in an audible voice. Sometimes we spend an hour every day in silence, so even just in the silence, sometimes I feel a real peace, like knowing that God's with me, even though I don't feel it or I don't hear Him speaking to me, but He can be a still, small, silent voice in the quiet, in the silence. And at other times I've found Him speaking to me through the scriptures, so I like to meditate on the Gospels. And I love to invite Him into the Gospel, so I'll ask God, what are you saying to me through these words as I meditate on the stories, the parables, the healings of God. And at other times I may hear Him through the Mass, so through the priest who's preaching, through the person that I encounter throughout the day, a smile, a friend that rings me up. Like just the small encounters of every day. I guess it's looking for the presence of God in all things. He doesn't often speak loudly over a big, loud, booming microphone.
Wow, that satisfies the question. Thank you. What can you give us now a typical day in religious life? What does it look like? What is it that you do apart from 1 hour silence and prayer?
Our life's pretty crazy. I have to find time of quiet.
I know you're very busy, very hard to get you a lot of the time.
That's right. It's interesting because my typical day is very different from day to day. I'm not in a formation house, so having made my final vows, I'm now living in a study mission house. So I've just come back to a year now where I'm doing full-time ministry and full-time mission. And I've recently just taken up a job in a parish 2 days a week as a youth worker. So a big part of our ministry is to evangelise and minister to young people. So we really believe in that call of proclaiming the gospel to young people and helping our young people to find a place where they can experience faith in a tangible way and a place too where they can have their own way of contributing to the church.
Is your aim to call them to vocational religious life when you're ministering to youth?
Absolutely.
Is it?
Not that I'm going out with my radars, vocational radars, but I'm always aware that young people are looking to find their purpose and meaning in life. So often when I'm having encounters or spending time with them pastorally, I will ask them the question, have you asked God what's your calling, what's your where's your life headed?
So what if for those youth that are not being called to religious life, how do you handle that?
I encourage them to whatever vocation they're called to. And I think too, just knowing that God desires the best for them and whatever path, whatever vocation that is, we will walk with all young people in all states of life and helping them to find whatever mission God has for them.
So what I hear is even though your aim is to discern whether the youth or the young ones are being called to a vocational calling, you're also very respectful and encouraging of the other callings in life, which is, married life or even single life or whatever the life may be. Well,
Definitely.
That's encouraging. Okay, Rachel, so what else do you do with your time?
So our typical day starts at 6 or 6:30, so we spend we'll start with the office, so we'll pray the divine office together. It's the prayer of the church, and we'll sing the Psalms, which is very beautiful. And we say that the first thing on our lips as we begin our day is prayer, so God is the first thing that we would speak as we awaken. And then we'll spend an hour in contemplation, so before the Blessed Sacrament, just having that silent time with God. And then we'll have either charismatic praise or intercession, depending on what day that is. And then we'll also go to Mass together. So we're very Eucharistic in the way that we're praying, going to Mass, and also spending time in adoration. And then we'll have breakfast together, and then we'll start our day, whether that's study or whether that's ministry. And then we come back together again at 5:30 for evening prayer, and once again in the evening for night prayer. And so we have quite a disciplined way of life, and also that we're also accountable to each other and to God, because we've decided to make a vow to this way of life. And then once we go into prayer in the evening, we then go into silence.
Okay.
Yes.
You mentioned the word charismatic before, and you also mentioned the word Eucharistic.
Yes.
Could you tease that out a bit for us? Because some people that are
Sure.
viewing this program may not understand what that means.
So charismatic way of praying, within the church we had a big outpouring of the Holy Spirit that came through back in the 60s. So what happened was across a lot of the churches there was a movement of the Spirit moving. Just like as we look in the scriptures, the Acts of the Apostles in Pentecost, when the apostles came together, they experienced the Holy Spirit in a new way, and that called them then to pray in tongues, and they bursted out in joy and in love and in happiness. And then they were called and empowered to go out and to really preach the gospel. And it's there that the church was born in a whole new way, because thousands were converted through the power of the Holy Spirit. So our charismatic way of praying is within the scriptures. It talks in Paul's writings about listening to the Spirit and listening to the words of God through the gifts of the Holy Spirit.
And what about the Eucharistic, the word Eucharistic? You said that you're very Eucharistic in your charism.
So through the Eucharist, Jesus gives himself to us, and it's very much the love of God that's poured out into our lives. So we believe that in spending time in front of the Eucharist, that Jesus is truly present to us, that the sacred bread has been consecrated, prayed and blessed by the priest, and we're then in the presence of the one who has given himself to us within the bread, within his real presence being with us.
And within church history, of course, you know, people say you're worshipping bread, but within church history there have been revelations of Christ's blood coming through the Eucharist, and they've been documented
That's
in
right.
history, like miraculous encounters.
There's
So
been many of
anybody
them.
that would want to learn a little bit more about that, they can perhaps Google Eucharistic miracles.
That's right.
Rachel, we've come to the end of our program. I very much enjoyed listening to your transitional story, and I'm so happy that you're there working with youth, and thank you for your good work, and hopefully you'll
you.
come back again sometime to be interviewed.
Yes, I look forward to that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You've been watching the Spirit of Life program. My name is Lucia Pace, and we'll see you again next week, same time, same place.
Bring His joy.